set, but Alberta ain't ready to kneel just yet. They chose their king, their power was met, but we don't answer to Ottawa yet. No crown gave us what we've earned, just dirt and fire and lessons learned. Now the ground it shakes, the steel it groans, and Alberta walks alone. We ride sovereign steel through fire, through frost. We ain't the last, we're the line they lost. Alberta stands, never on its knees. A nation born in the forge of the free. From the rigs to the rails, the crops to the code, we lit their streets, we bore their load. They laughed at pride, they mocked the West, but freedom don't die, it just waits for the test. The cowboys ride, the farmers rise, 5 million strong under open skies. No leash, no lie, no foreign throne. This land is steel and it stands alone. We ride sovereign steel through fire, through frost. We ain't the last, we're the line they lost. Alberta stands, never on its knees. A nation born in the forge of the free. Can't kill the mountain, can't drown the plain, can't burn the spirit that won't be chained. He stares down east with a calloused hand and says, this time we draw the line in the land. We ride sovereign steel through fire, through frost. We ain't the last.
Welcome. It's 7-Eleven Daily Summary with Bruce Scholl. I'm so excited to be here with you. What an amazing time to be alive. We are living through such an extraordinary time. So I'm grateful that you're here. Thank you so much. If you are participating, make sure to share this out, get some more eyeballs on this information. I have got one heck of a bang-up guest coming to join us tonight. I am so excited to have him. You know what I've been missing though, and I apologize for not being here, but we are pushing through excuse me, on the sovereignty of Alberta. We are making a nation of our own here, and that's where our time and our energy has been pushed is into making this great nation of Alberta one of our own, and leaving the tyrants of Ottawa in the dust. That is our goal, is to break free and to create this wonderful, wonderful nation of hard-working Albertans. Anyway, I'm so excited to be here and so excited to have you joining me. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I had this gentleman on. He was one of my first guests when I started out Unscrew the News almost 3 years ago, and I'm excited to have him back because we're going to talk about a number of things, but liberty being one of them. And he is from the Art of Liberty Foundation. I thought it was fitting, especially since we are cresting this very challenging time and we are going to be battling to create our own nation. So I thought it would be really suiting to have this gentleman on, and it turns out that we have even more connection as we were talking just before we hit record. But I'm excited to have him. It's Etienne de Boetie. So excited to have him joining me. And we're going to get into it here very shortly. Anyway, I always like to start off by saying I love to support local businesses. Support local yourself if you can. Try to do your best. And here's a plug that we have to talk about this. I'm so excited. I got another project in the works at the same time, but so much is happening, and so many people, I realized, have their own small businesses or medium-sized businesses or big businesses or services here in Alberta. Anyway, I'm working with a guy. We're going to create the albertastore.com so we can support local businesses, create that network of great people here in the province of Alberta and soon to be the nation of Alberta. So anyway, watch for that, the albertastore.com. And that's going to be coming to you very shortly, hopefully within the next couple of months. Anyway, I like to support local. I have to shout out to nuggetstacker.com. I am not your investment advisor, but I do suggest getting gold and silver to protect your family's wealth. Nuggetstacker.com. I am going to show, I'm going to put a QR code right up at the top. Where did my QR code go? Hey, QR code, where are you? What? I'm missing a QR code. Where do you guys know where it went? What the heck? All right, I can't show it to you, but anyway, you can head to my website, unscrewthenews.com. Go to the link for Nugget Stacker, get you, I think it's 0.25% off. The prices are going crazy for silver and gold, but get some silver and gold for your family. All right, we're going to get into unscrewing some news. And I am coming to from the heart of the battle-ready nation of Alberta, and we bring you truth and optimism. Our goal is to break free from the media and the globalist mind control. It is April 9th, 2026. This is episode number 276. And this is called The Art of Liberty with Etienne de Boetie. Very excited to have him. And he is the CEO of the Art of Liberty Foundation. He is also maybe I'll let him talk about this, but we're going to get into it. And I'm just going to tell you this because it really, really does draw a straight line across to what we're doing here. But he's associated with the Free State Project in New Hampshire, and we've got to learn more about that. But he has just finished up a large project talking about the biggest criminal event on the American people, and we're going to get into it, and he is going to expose some really, really deep, dark secrets that have been holding the American people and Canada back. But let's get into it. Anyway, I want to welcome him to the stage. Thank you so much for joining me, sir. It's a pleasure to have you, and I'm grateful to have you back.
Hey, Bruce, it's good to be back with you and with your audience.
Thank you so much for joining me from the I'm wondering, I'm guessing that you probably have gorgeous weather. We're having some really nice weather here today, but you're down in Tennessee, in a beautiful state of Tennessee. So you must be enjoying almost spring-like weather there. Is that right?
Some days it's almost summer-like weather. So I'm in the southern part of the United States. Memphis, Tennessee, which I jokingly call the home of Elvis Presley, Federal Express, and Grok. And so it's absolutely it's starting to be beautiful, and I've even got like a tan going because we've been laying out and soaking up the sun and really enjoying the spring in the South.
Well, that is the life of a freedom-minded libertarian, and I'm sure that you can, I guess, explain a little bit about what you're up to. Do you mind telling us? You've got some fingers also in some pots. One of them being the Art of Liberty Foundation, where I met you when we originally met. I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago. And we were both sort of working on a little sticker project that you and I might remember called White Rose. Mm-hmm. you were also doing this. We were working on this project called the Art of Liberty Foundation, and I'm just going to bring it up just to show people your website, so that we can briefly talk about that. But this is the Art of Liberty Foundation. And do you mind just giving us a little bit of background on yourself and what you're up to?
Sure. So we're a startup voluntarist public policy organization. And a voluntarist is simply someone that believes that all human relations need to be voluntary, that nobody has an exemption from morality, especially the government, and nobody has rights that other people don't have. And so I'm kind of best known for my book, Government, the Biggest Scam in History Exposed. And the subtitle of that is How Intergenerational Organized Crime Runs the Government, the Media, and Academia. And that really is the big reveal of both the book and what we're trying to do at the Art of Liberty Foundation is that government is inherently on its face illegitimate. It has been the biggest scam in all of human history. And when I say illegitimate, it's impossible to have a moral, legitimate government. It's a dumb way to organize society. It's easily, rigged and hijacked by moneyed interests. It has the wrong incentive structure to solve problems, societal, socioeconomic problems in society. And it's either been the biggest scam in all of human history, or it's been the dumbest idea in all of human history. And so here, in the United States, we celebrate our Constitution, and our Constitution, was designed to limit government and protect rights. And it's failed to limit government at all. We have the largest government the planet has ever seen. And it has failed to even protect the most basic of human rights, that are outlined in what we call the Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution that is supposed to protect individual liberty and protect individual rights. And so government has been the biggest scam in all of human history, and it's really best thought of as a technique for robbing and controlling populations. But before we get into the robbing and controlling, I just want to just really bring it home for your audience. When I say it's illegitimate, it's impossible to have a legitimate government. If my fiance and myself can't vote that Bruce has to give us all of his money because there's two of us and one of Bruce, it doesn't matter if there's 3 of us or 10 of us or 335 million of us. There's no magical additional person that makes, the moral equivalent of gang rape or a lynching, legitimate and moral. You can't be bound by a social contract that you didn't sign. So if the average American didn't sign the Constitution, then they're not bound by the Constitution. And it's impossible for anybody, an American or a Canadian, to delegate a right that they do not possess themselves, the ability to tax, steal someone's money and call it taxation, or the ability to make up rules for the whole continent, or, the whole, quote unquote country. If you don't have that ability yourself, then you can't delegate a right that you don't have yourself to a representative to represent you doing something you don't have the ability to do yourself. And so it's been this big, it's what Hitler called the big lie. They get away with it because they indoctrinate the belief in government into the population in mandatory government schools before kids are old enough to really evaluate the logic or the morality of the idea. And then they're in the United States, and I'm sure it's the same in Canada, our schools and our scouting programs and police and military training are using a variety of unethically manipulative techniques to not just, sell the population on the legitimacy and the necessity and the desirability of having a government, even though it's not legitimate, desirable, or necessary at all. There's no ironclad law of the universe that says you got to have a government, but they're using these ethically manipulative techniques. So the mandatory government school, You know, it's being indoctrinated as a religion. The flag is the artificial holy symbol. The teacher is the priest. The school is the church. You're going to learn about the holy documents of the Constitution. You're going to sing the hymns of the Star Spangled Banner and the national anthem. You're going to do the common prayer of the, Pledge of Allegiance. They're going to take you to Mecca, Washington, D.C., government land, in middle school, in a low cost or free or price supported trip, depending on where in the country you live. And they're going to take you into the cathedral of the capital that looks like the Vatican. I'm sure yours probably looks like the Vatican too, but like ours looks like the Vatican.
Very much like it. Yeah.
Very much like the Vatican. So it's a cathedral. And you're going to be taken to the temples along the Potomac, which are literally, in some cases, carbon copies of Greek temples. And you're going to there, you'll be brought in to see the deities of in the United States. It's Lincoln and Jefferson, and it's very hushed and it's very reverent.
Right.
And, you're like, it's a con job. And then, the subtitle of my book, Government, the Biggest Scam in History, is how intergenerational organized crime runs the government, the media, and academia. And so then the media and academia, to a degree, come along and reinforce the mythology and the religion and everything in the United States, weaving the American flag into moments of high positive emotion, within movies and television shows, product placing the American flag, sometimes dozens and dozens of times in a movie, building up to these moments of high positive emotion. And then they show you the flag, which is a well-known marketing technique called anchoring. They're going to anchor the excitement of the movie or this moment of high positive emotion within the movie. And in some cases, the entire movie builds to a climactic scene. And then at that moment of the highest positive emotion, Rocky winning, his fight, and he's now Adrian. It's crazy. Yeah. Like once you understand that they're doing this, and that's a lot of what we do at the Art of Liberty Foundation, and what I do with the books is, you can only the magician can only fool the public as long as the public doesn't understand the trick. And what I'm doing with the books is I'm breaking out the tricks that the magician is using to trick the population into semi-voluntarily paying their tithe, because it's a religion, right? And so, like, some people are proud taxpayers, right? I'm a proud taxpayer, and they've been completely chumped into handing organized crime their money. And that's what it's all about. It's we're stealing your money. And these are the techniques that we're using on the population to get them to go along with what has been, and what we touched on briefly and what we'll talk about here in a second, has been the greatest theft in all of human history. So the greatest scam, government, has produced what we'll talk about here in a second, the greatest theft in all of human history from the American people.
Amazing. And it is just so perfectly timed that you would have all of these concepts and ideas, because, like I said to you already, is that we're working through this process of freeing our nation. And we want to start from the ground. Like we want to throw all of, what we've been living under and living with, Windsor system of government, blah, blah, blah. And we should have a completely clean slate as far as, what are we going to do as far as government? What are we going to do as far as law and order? How do we make that work as far as a new nation? So this is really timely, and you are imparting some very important information as we go through that process. So I'm really grateful that you're here, and it's even more exciting, once I realized, oh my gosh, you have so much more to then impart and hopefully help us to have even more to think about as we go through this process, because Again, we're starting from, we want to start from scratch. You know, we don't want to make the same mistakes that we've been living with, and we don't want to join the United States because we don't want to go from one master to another. So
Right.
anyway, it's a very interesting process and a lot of question marks. So I'm glad
Well,
that
I tell you,
you're
why don't
here
we
and sharing.
why don't we talk about the problem a little bit more, and then we can talk about the
Yeah,
solution, and we can talk about what we're doing here in the United States with the Free State Project and with other, attempts to either, move to some area that has, a negotiated sovereignty, or, some, like we're looking for people are beginning to vote with their feet in the United States, and they're beginning to
yeah,
move to other states that have lower taxes and have more freedom. And then in some of those states, we're pushing secession as well. We want to, break away from the organized crime government in Washington D.C. And the other thing that
yeah,
we say one of the other things that we say at the Art of Liberty Foundation is, whether or not you believe in having a government, and I know a lot of people, because it has been religiously indoctrinated into them. They find it, they're and not just that, but the media has been, you know, seeding the idea that a world without government is dogs and cats,
lawless.
yeah, lawless
Yes,
and craziness and motorcycle gangs and the movie The Postman or Mad Max, or like just
Mad Max for sure. Yeah, yeah,
The Purge, anarchy. Anarchy doesn't
yes,
mean no
yes, yes.
rules. Anarchy means no rulers. But because the rulers don't want the
Nice.
population to know that there's an option on the menu called no rulers, because if it was between rulers and no rulers, people may choose no rulers. So they've used this media system, again, how intergenerational organized crime runs the government, the media, and academia. So they've used this media system to make people think that no rulers equals chaos and dystopia, when it's actually the complete opposite, that you would have much more wealth, you'd have much more freedom, you'd have much more harmony in society if you weren't battling at the ballot box over who controls the school board, or who controls the government, or who controls the state,
Yep.
local, federal. You don't need to do any of that. The good news message that we'll get to after we break down the rest is the world is a self-organizing system. It produces spontaneous order, and the free market and free people, can provide everything the government does except redistribution, which is immoral. But what we're about to talk about right now is if the government just wasn't stealing the value out of everybody's money, we would all be
Yes.
crazy wealthy, like
Mm.
unbelievably wealthy, if the government just wasn't stealing the value out of everybody's money. And that's, I think, the next thing that I want to really get into is the Art of Liberty Foundation. We just did a major economic analysis where we used 4 different, AI models, and we broke down what the total cost of fractional reserve banking, government taxation, and here in the United States, the theft of everybody's social security through underpayment. So in the United States, the government steals our money, forces us into a social security system, and then they're supposed to index that
Hmm.
to the cost of living. So you're supposed to get a COLA, cost of living adjustment, and the government is lying to the population kind of brazenly, like just unbelievable, level of
Hmm.
lying to your face about what the inflation rate is, so it can rip off grandmas for their cost of living adjustment on social security and save about 190 billion a year. So they're stealing 190 billion a year
Mm.
in social security cost of living adjustments, and also what they owe to investors that buy our treasury inflation protected securities. It's called TIPS. and it's a class of U.S. debt, bills, bonds, and notes that are indexed to the inflation rate. And so when they understate what the inflation rate is, they don't have to pay these investors that buy these tips, bills, bonds, and notes, what they're owed. And then they're also ripping off retirees, military, that they get pensions by not, paying their COLAs. But that's a huge theft anyway.
Right.
But before we get into how they do it, I got to give everybody kind of like just a little bit of understanding about, okay, who's at the top, because, you like in your introduction, used the word globalist. And so the same system that is running things in the United States is running things in Canada, and is running things in the UK,
Sure.
and is running things in Russia, and is running things in Iran, and is running things all over the planet, because it's the banks at the top. And the banks have essentially, you can almost think of the government as a creature of the banks. The governments allow the banks to engage in a process called fractional reserve banking, where money comes into circulation and into existence through the banking system, even though that's inflationary and even though that steals the value out of everybody else's money. And so I'm going to talk about the United States because I'm just more familiar with the United States. And then I want you to feel free to jump in and point out the Canadian equivalents.
Sure.
But in the United States, people understood that paper money was bad mojo, and quote unquote, our founders, wrote into the Constitution that only gold and silver could be used as money in the United States, because we'd already had, and the world had already had multiple problems with fiat paper currencies and paper money, and people losing, like countries being destroyed, and banks, crooked banks issuing notes that they couldn't do, and everybody's seen pictures of bank runs, and It's a Wonderful Life, everybody's lined up to get their money out of the bank, before before their, because the banker was lying and was crooked. And so the quote unquote founders said only gold and silver, because you can't manufacture it on a printing press, you can't create it electronically, with digital dollars. And so in the United States, prior to really, to 1913 and the Federal Reserve System, a $20 bill was a warehouse receipt for a $20 gold piece that was a 1 ounce gold coin. Back then, it was something called a St. Gaudens gold coin. And that $20 gold piece had essentially maintained its purchasing power for thousands of years. And so in this report that we did at artofliberty.org/inflation, we show a picture of a 1 ounce, gold Aurelius, which was the kind of the gold coin of Roman times. And a 1 ounce gold coin in Roman times would buy a finely tailored man's toga, a really nice set of sandals, and a belt.
Wow.
Okay. And then if you fast forward to, let's say 1912, before the Federal Reserve System came online, a 1 ounce gold coin in the, in modern times would in 1912 would buy a finely tailored man's suit, a belt, a pair of shoes, and a tweed hat, a straw hat, very popular in the thing. And then if you took the $20 bill and you took which was back then was a warehouse receipt for the gold piece. So
I see.
You could go to your bank branch and you could put that $20 bill at the teller window and say, I want to get a $20 gold piece. And they would give you that $20 gold piece. And so the bankers really didn't like that, because what the bankers like to do, and what was a common occurrence prior to the institution of the Federal Reserve and really the bankers lobbying and bribing our government to give them this monopoly on the creation of currency and credit in the United States and replace what had been a gold standard with this funny money that they get to create out of thin air. Prior to that, we'd had not the money wasn't losing value every year. The money was actually gaining value because you couldn't print it on a printing
Really?
press. So it was benignly deflationary. And so a gold standard, your dollar buys more and more and more every single year as innovations and productivity improvements reduce the cost of
Sure.
either manufacturing or distributing the luxuries and the necessities of life. And so with the bank, but there were, the banks have been crooked since the time of Jesus, right? I mean, who did Jesus fought against the government and the money changers? And so the scam of the money changers for centuries and centuries and centuries has been the bankers and the goldsmiths were the only ones that really had safes as part of their business. They had a safe when nobody else had a safe. Everybody else lived in straw houses and thatched things, and the house wasn't that big, and somebody would probably be able to find your gold in your house pretty quickly unless you'd hidden it really, 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 really well. And so what people would do is they would go and they would deposit their gold and their silver with the goldsmith or with the bank, and then the bank would issue a bank note, and the bank note would say, on deposit with this bank, you have, $20 in gold or $10 in gold or whatever it is. And then that gold was safe and secure. That note, if it got stolen from you or whatever, the banker could take a look on his list of receipts and replace it, a little bit like a American Express traveler's check, back in the day. And so
Sure.
that prohibited people breaking into people's houses, and so that was like a good. But what the bankers noticed, the crooked bankers noticed, was that so now the bank notes begin circulating as currency in these communities, and people wouldn't go and get the gold and then go and give it to the merchant. They would just give the banknote to the merchant. Yeah. And then that's really how paper money developed. And then, so the bankers are like, ooh, nobody comes and claims all of these, their gold. And so we can just write out some extra banknotes and go spin them into circulation. And so the bankers would create excess banknotes, and they would go be living high on the hog and buying, luxuries and things like that. And then eventually people would realize, hey, the banker's crooked and he's printing excess banknotes, and we got to go get our gold, because no telling how many of these he did. And so then that would create this run on the bank. Yes. And then people would be lined up, and the guys in the front of the line, they got their gold back. And then eventually they run out of gold. And then everybody else in the back of the line is now broke and destitute. And there was no FDIC. There was no insurance. Like, you lost everything in a collapse of a bank.
Yeah.
And so that scam of the bankers, though, made some crazy fortunes. And then those bankers are like, how do we institutionalize this theft? How do we make it larger scale? How do we steal it at even greater scale? And so here in the United States, they lobbied, they all got together on a place called Jekyll Island, which was J.P. Morgan's hunting lodge. It's an island off the coast of Georgia. They traveled there by a private train from New York City, which was like the private jet of 1911. This meeting occurred in kind of 1911. And so they take the private jet of the time down to the Georgia coast. They dismiss the entire lodge staff, the regular lodge staff. They bring in temporary employees, so nobody knew who it was. They all agreed that they weren't going to use their own names or their last names. They would only address each other by their first names, and great secrecy.
Really?
Oh yeah. Oh, it's detailed in a famous book, The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin, and he breaks down the history of how what came to be known as the Aldrich Plan, which then came to be known as the Federal Reserve Act here in the United States, was both formulated and then put into existence. But we'd had three other incidents, at least three and some change, but three hard experiments in the United States with having a central bank, and all of them were crooked.
Right.
And they had like 20-year, they'd had 20-year charters, and at the end of the charter, they were always kicked out because they were always crooked. And so there was a real understanding that the bankers are scum and that the bankers are crooks, and we don't want to have a national bank, we don't want to have a central bank, we don't want, like, they're trying to get that in because they've done it in other countries, and it's always bad for the population when the bankers control the currency. And so it's the last thing in the world that you want. And lo and behold, look at what's happened. So anyway, so the bankers lobby and bribe the Congress to pass the Federal Reserve Act. They pass it on Christmas Eve, while the majority of our Congress is home with their families. A sniveling few, traitors stick around Washington, D.C. enough to pass this, bill in the dead of night on Christmas Eve.
Yes.
Where they didn't even,
Yes.
like, there's a lot of belief they didn't even have a quorum. It was essentially shady from the beginning. And then that created the Federal Reserve, which then backstopped the banks to engage in this fractional reserve banking, because the Federal Reserve would serve as what's called the lender of last resort. And when a bank got into trouble for issuing too many notes, then they would provide liquidity to keep the confidence in the whole crooked system. Now, they immediately began inflating the money supply. And so they immediately began issuing, warehouse receipts for more than they had in gold. And they produced something called the Roaring Twenties in the United States. If you've ever heard of the Roaring Twenties, there was so much money that they were creating and sloshing around there. So they begin providing, kind of unlimited money to cartel companies to buy up and consolidate their industry and monopolize various aspects of the economy. And they begin, being criminals and doing, large scale criminality. And they issue too many, warehouse receipts, and the government gets itself into a budgetary issue as well. And so in 1933, through the president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, they just steal everybody's gold coins. And President Roosevelt issues an executive order 6102, I think, if I remember correctly. And it requires all American citizens to turn in all of their gold coins and all of their bullion. And there were exceptions for dentists, and there were exceptions for numismatics, and there was exceptions for pieces of art. And there was a couple carve outs so that they could rig the system and hold on to their own personal gold in various ways.
Sure. Yeah.
United States, they stole everybody's gold, and that's the gold that's in Fort Knox. That was the gold that was stolen from the American people, so that now the bankers can really go to town and begin creating kind of unlimited fiat paper tickets and digital dollars. And so now the way the scam is morphed in the modern day is when you go to, and also one other thing. So there were banks that were called full reserve banks that said, we don't engage in fractional reserve banking. We're 100% full reserve bank. We give you, we may give you more interest if you lock up your money for a longer time. So you may get a higher interest rate if you get like equivalent of a certificate of deposit, a CD, or, some kind of time, like if you guarantee to loan us the money for 20 years or 10 years, you're
20 years or something. Yeah.
Higher rate of return, and we'll pay you more interest. And then we can go and loan it to people at a higher, thing. And so you can still have banking without fractional reserve banking. But once they stole all the gold coins, then that was no longer a possibility. And then the final thing they did is they socialized the cost of the crooked banks that went bust and took everybody's money by forcing everybody in the United States to subsidize through their taxes the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC, which insures all the banks in the United States up to $250,000
Right.
account. And so if the bank goes under, 250K, well, why should everybody in the United States pay to insure crooked banks? Shouldn't the banks themselves pay the insurance, and then the insurance companies evaluate the bank on their banking practices and how much they're loaning out that they don't have, and what kind of controls are in place and things like that. And that would be, so you could have fractional reserve banking in an honest monetary system, as long as you disclose it to the depositors, and you have some limits, and you're managing it, personal. But people would have the choice of, hey, I don't want my money like I want a full reserve bank. I get that you're going to offer me a little bit more interest, but I don't care. I don't trust you, and I don't want my money at risk at all. I wanted 100% full reserve. So that could have been an option for people. And so anyway, they do away with that option as well, because now there's no full reserve option at all, because they've stolen all the reserves, right? And so there's no more gold coins. And so now it's all paper dollars. And so at the time, I mentioned it was, gold was $20 an ounce, and a 1 ounce gold coin was a $20 gold piece.
Yeah.
So they immediately revalue gold at, I want to say, $32 or $35 an ounce. And so
I thought it was $35 an ounce.
I think it was 35. And so they like rip off everybody immediately, by devaluing the value of the currency that they just given, so now it takes, $35 to buy an ounce of gold, versus it used to take 20.
Yeah.
And that was an admission of the fraud of what they were doing and what they had done. But now fast forward to the modern age and what we exist under today. And so the way the scam works today is, when you go to a bank to get a mortgage or to get a car loan, or if you're borrowing on their credit card, they're not loaning you depositor money. They just tickle the keyboard. They credit your account with digital dollars, and 500. If you buy a house for $500,000, they create $500,000. Now, the example that I like to use is imagine if I have $1, and you, dear listener or viewer that's listening to this wherever you're at, you have a dollar, and both of us have the only $2 in the world. Okay, there's only $2 in the world. I've got one of them, and you've got one of them, dear listener. And so now the bank. So I have 50% of the world's wealth. You have 50% of the world's wealth. Now a bank or a government comes along and creates 2 additional dollars. Well, now you and I have been robbed of, 50% of our wealth. Okay. And now the bank has stolen 50% of the world's wealth. Okay. And now multiply that by $1 trillion. And that's what's been going on. The banks have been robbing the population of the United States and other countries. And they've gotten this system in almost every single country on the planet. There is a central bank, and there is fractional reserve banking.
Yep.
And in the United States, it has been responsible for a total extraction, north of $300 trillion in fractional reserve banking alone. Okay, so the
Mm.
average, and I'll go ahead and I was going to share my screen and just kind of take your
Do you want to
audience.
share? Yeah.
I'm going to take your audience through, what that looks like, and how the scam works. And so I'm going to show a. This is for the United States. But what we're looking at right here is we're looking at different annual incomes. Okay, $35,000 US, $60,000 US annual salary, 120,000 annual salary, 250K annual salary, 500K, 1 million, 5 million, $10 million. In the United States, a 60K US dollar annual salary is kind of the median average worker. Okay. And so the
Mm-hmm.
inflation
Mm-hmm.
tax part of that, okay, the money that you lose because they're stealing the value out of that system. Remember, in an honest system, your dollar should be buying more and more every year. But in this crooked system, you're losing purchasing power. In the United States, the Fed targets the inflation rate at 2%, which is still a huge number. Like if you're losing
Yeah.
2% of your money each and every year, okay, then everything you save is being is having that money eroded. And over a 40-year career and a 20-year retirement, that component alone is going to cost you $760,000. Okay.
Wow.
But that's
That's
not
massive.
everything. Okay. And so actually, let me see if I can go to a different slide. Hold on. All right. So this version is so I have two versions of this slide. I have one version that compares it to a neutral monetary system, and I have one version that compares it to the gold standard system. And so then
Yep.
there's two different, there's a number of different things that are working on that this system causes. One's called the Cantillon effect. And the Cantillon effect is when the banks and when the government create hundreds of billions of dollars in either fractional reserve banking or stimulus, or they give one of their favored companies like Walmart or something like that, $100 billion loan or whatever it is. When Walmart or when the government spends it, they get the biggest bang for that buck. And by the time those dollars circulate to the rest of the economy, you're paying it. It bids up prices. It has an inflationary effect, and by the time the average worker gets it, they're using old dollars that have less purchasing power to buy things that have gone up in value because of how this money comes into circulation, and that's called the Cantillon effect.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to cost the average worker about 42K a year, or sorry, 72,000 over the lifetime, over the 60 year period. And then
Yep.
where you see the gold
Or is it a
deflation,
40-year period?
that's what you would have gotten.
40-year.
Yeah, that's what you would have gotten because your money gained in value instead of losing value. Okay. And then there's a final component to the theft called the compound trap. And what the compound trap is so because we have this dishonest monetary system, and because it's driving the cost of houses and education and healthcare through the roof, people end up having to borrow for things that they would not have had to borrow for. And the interest that you pay to the bank to get a mortgage or to get a college education,
Yes.
or to pay for healthcare or whatever, you wouldn't have had to pay for that outside if it wasn't for the crooked monetary system. So you're going to pay another $308,000 at a 60K salary, typically over, and that most of that is a mortgage payment, but some of that might be college debt and healthcare costs, whatever. And so the total delta for that for a 60K person is $170,000 sorry, $1.7 million.
Or 1.7.
$1.7
Yeah.
million. Now then the theft keeps on going because, as I mentioned, the government is lying to the population about what the inflation rate is so they don't have to pay cost of living adjustments. And the difference right now is about $2,000 a month. It's over $2,000 a month that the government's stealing out of the average
Wow.
Social Security recipient. They owe them, like, the cost of living has exploded here. They're lying about what the inflation rate is, so they don't have to pay the cost of living, even though it's due. And so, so by the time that, if you retired today, okay, if you retired in 2004, it would have been 200,000 plus. But if you retire today, there's a compounding effect, and you're looking at another 770,000 that they're going to steal from you. And then finally, these other
Jeez, eh?
columns are your federal income tax, your payroll tax,
Mhm.
the full burden. So in the United States, the employer pays half and you pay half for what's called the payroll tax that goes to, unemployment insurance and things like that in the United States. Now, absent the federal government mandating everybody participate in their monopoly unemployment scheme and whatever, okay, your employer would give you that additional money and that would go to you and you would decide
Yes.
how to buy unemployment insurance. And in the United States, before the government came in and took over, we actually had dozens of what were called mutual aid societies, and almost everybody in society, because nobody wants to, nobody wants to get hurt on the job. Nobody, everybody needs to be insured and everything like that. And so we had all of these mutual aid societies that provided health care much more cost effectively than under these government schemes and monopoly systems and everything like that. And it was much better care. That's back in the days where they used to have doctors made house calls and things like that. So it was much better care, much cheaper. Okay. And your dollar bought so much more that everybody could afford way better health care. And get this, the mutual aid societies competed with each other for which one could provide better benefits more cost effectively. So there was a competitive effect between the mutual aid societies. So you got a better product from the market than you would do under, the monopoly government system. And then there's state and local taxes. Now, we acknowledge in the report, so we break all of this down in kind of detail, and we acknowledge that this tax component, you get a little something for it. You don't get anything. All of this, the Social Security and the fractional reserve banking, all of this is pure theft. You didn't see a dollar for it. They stole
Right.
your money the same way that if they reached into your pocket and stole money out of your wallet or out of your pocket, like, they just stole it. Now, you get some services from the government for this portion right here, but number one, you're overpaying 20 to 40% if you had bought it in the free market. And we break that down in the report, and we explain what the assumptions are, around those
Sure.
numbers. And in the United States, the government itself admits that the waste, fraud, and abuse, especially at the federal level, is so astronomical that you might as well just set 40% of it on fire. Okay, you might as well set
Jeez, eh?
the equivalent of taking 40% of your taxes and just setting it on fire. And that's the government's own auditors admitting that there's so much waste, fraud, and abuse in the system, especially in the Department of Defense, especially in housing and urban development, the incompetency of the Postal Service. It just so much waste, fraud, and abuse that yeah, you got something, but you overpaid, and you paid for, a lot of bureaucrats and criminals in Washington, D.C. that are stealing an amazing amount of your tax money. The total sum is $3.29 million over a 40-year career and a 20-year retirement for an average worker that makes 60K. If you make 120K US, that number goes up to $6.32 million over those 60 years. If you make $250,000, that number goes up to $12.8 million over those years. If you make $500,000, it's $25 million. If you make $1 million a year, it's $49 million. They're stealing our money, and it's astronomical. And because it's being stolen sneakily, trickily, through, like, most people do not understand how it's being stolen, and the government's mandatory school isn't going to tell you, and the monopoly media that the bankers have bought up with the 20. So where is this money going? Well, it's going to the banking industry, and from 1913 to 2025, it was between 15 and 25 trillion dollars. So the way that works is not a dollar for dollar system where they stole $350 trillion and they get $350 trillion. They steal this amount from you, and then they get, but that's a crazy amount. 15 to 25 trillion dollars is an incredible level of theft. That's what allows them to buy up the governments. That's what allows them to buy up the media. That's what allows them to buy up the search engines. That's what allows them to create this media system that is distracting and deceiving the population about what's really going on in the United States. It's a huge number. As I mentioned, it's $350 trillion. In world history, the next biggest theft was the British extraction of India, which was like a 40+ year extraction from the Indian people of for everything from forced labor to trade resources, things like that. That was $45 trillion, an estimated $45 trillion. So it's a 8x bigger than the next biggest theft in human history. And this is what pays for this monopoly media that is confusing, everybody. Now, what's interesting is, so as I mentioned, we fact checked this against 4 different AI systems, the top 4 AI systems in the world: XAI's Grok, Anthropic's Claude, Gemini, Google Gemini, and ChatGPT 5.2. And essentially, they all converged on the same numbers. There's a little bit of disagreement. For the most part, you can go and you can see the exact methodology that we use in our report at artofliberty.org/inflation. You can download it. You can see the methodology. And all of these AI systems agree with that headline number of $2.7 million. They all agree on the banking profits. They all agree on what this extraction is. And so that's that's one of the most fascinating things, trying to get 4 AI models to agree on on anything of this complexity. And this is completely replicable. So you don't have to believe Etienne de la Boetie squared. You can actually go and in the report, we actually give you the prompt, and we tell you, how to ask the right question and see what they'll give you.
Oh, right on.
So you can ask a different AI. You can ask one of these AIs. You can take our methodology and you can give it to an AI, and you can say, hey, just check the math. Here's the complete math. And by the way, this isn't, so all of these are the government's, in most cases, the government's own data. Most of the data sets that we used is the Federal Reserve's H6, how much money has been created over, history, or the Bureau of Labor Statistics, official inflation rate, or, these are quote unquote official numbers that we based all of these calculations on. So it's not, you can go and you can tell the AI to use this. The one big difference is we used alternative inflation indexes to show the difference between what the government says the inflation rate is
Right.
and what alternative indexes say the inflation rate is. And so when we say that the Bureau of Labor Statistics is lying and they're saying that we've got, 2.5 to, whatever inflation rate, the slide I'm sharing now, this one is the government's, estimate. And then we used a alternative index called Shadow Stats that actually uses the government's own methodology before the Bureau of Labor Statistics was politicized and before the Bureau of
Oh
Labor
yeah.
Statistics made a variety of changes in the way they calculate inflation, that then each one of those has been acknowledged to reduce the amount of reduce the published inflation rate. One of them is called hedonic adjustment, one of them is called substitution. And we break all of that down in the report, artofliberty.org/inflation. But if you take those out, then the Shadow Stats estimate is using the BLS methodology before they instituted these things that began under, stating the inflation rate. The other alternative index that we use, this other line here, is something called the Chapwood Index, and the Chapwood Index goes out and actually buys. So the government's basket of goods is not really reflective of like the average basket of goods that a human being goes out and buys.
Right.
And
right.
so
Right.
you actually take a look at the top, 150 items that human beings actually buy. Everything from services to Verizon FiOS to to daycare to whatever it is, and you buy them in different cities. That's what the Chapwood Index does, and so they do it in the top 50 cities, and they're tracking along with Shadow Stats. It's essentially everybody is higher than the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and so but you can plug in your own alternative to try and figure out what it is. We're going to be doing some calculations. We're going to try and recreate it even tighter and even more defensively in the coming months. But in essence, that's kind of what's going on. I mentioned these things. So the final thing I just want to share with your audience, then we'll talk, kind of move it to solutions, is I talked about the compound trap. I talked about the cotillion effect. And so I want to show people what that looks like in the housing market in the United States. And so what I've got a visualization of housing prices versus median income starting at around 1953, moving forward until 2025. And back then, the average house was $17K, and the average median income was about $17K. Okay. And then in 1971, when we go off the gold standard completely, the two numbers began dramatically diverging as people began, buying more house as an inflation hedge. And so the government's monetary policy begins creating unintended consequences. And one of those unintended consequences is that now houses become, more and more prohibitively expensive, to where now people have to borrow from the banks that created the problem in the first place. And they've got to borrow more and more and more and more and more. Now, this line, for those people that might be listening to on a podcast app, this line, hockey sticks up, okay, until about 2006. And then we've got the global financial crisis, and the banks, because of their shenanigans with mortgage-backed securities and with no-cost loans and all of the criminality on Wall Street, they tank the economy. And now there is widespread unemployment in the United States. People can't afford the houses, many of which the banks gave them in what, frankly, could have been, the financial scam that I'm about to outline, which was their plan all along. But, they gave people ninja loans, no income, no documentation loans, and now they go and they repossess these houses. And then in 2012 in the United States, they have the government has a program called REO to retail, and they pump the banks full of money through the TARP and the TALF and the bailouts. And, and so now the banks are flush with cash and they begin buying homes in the United States at in bulk through an auction process.
Right.
And so now the banks
pennies on the dollar. Yeah.
Yes. They buy up these houses that have been driven down by their own shenanigans. So the
Yes.
banks, and then they ride it back up. They buy by 2022, they bought over 450,000 houses in the United States. So now the banks and private equity and companies, that have been created through private equity or through the banks to buy up these houses and manage these houses, they raise rents faster. And so now the cost to get into a house, number one, you've got to borrow way more. You got to have way more of a down payment. And so, number one, you either got to pay more interest to the banks that caused all of this, shenanigans, or you have to rent. And now you're renting from the bank and you're paying 2 to 3 times what you would have rented on before the banks did this. And so this is kind of the compound trap and the cotillion effect made visible. Like that's how, that's one of these hidden ways that this dishonest monetary system is robbing the average person that most people don't realize, because the government school system isn't going to tell you. The government's rip off colleges and universities, they're not going to tell you about it. And the monopoly media, they're going to pretend that inflation is caused because fairies come at night and sprinkle pixie dust on gas pumps and price tags. And it has nothing to do with the monetary system, when inflation is always a monetary phenomenon. This is what causes it. And so we break it down in the report, how the government has bought off the economics profession, how they've monopolized the media. This is the globalists. This is this scale, this theft. This is our enemy. It is our ancient enemy, the money changers and the government, okay, that are in a partnership to steal the value out of most people's money when they don't even understand, how that's being stolen. And so, I'll just leave it there. Did you want to go through that one more slide?
Yeah, I have a question for you. So, well, no, it's okay as far as the slides are concerned. But what I want to do, Etienne, is to be able to do the same thing for Canada. I want to be able to put this into an AI system and pump this out here for Canada before we meet the next time. So I got to do this in the background. So maybe you can help me get the,
absolutely.
the prompts that you used.
I want to try and do that. So it's in artofliberty.org/inflation. And you can just give it to these AI systems. And I recommend using all 4 because they fact check each other's work. One system might hallucinate. They might get a number wrong. Like it took us a while to get, all 4 systems into consensus. But you can take our methodology and you can run it for Canada, and you can figure out the exact same thing in Canada or any country that you're listening to. And you can get that 4 AI convergence, and you'll understand what it's costing you. And you can take the exact same methodology and you can replicate it. You can replicate ours for the United States. You can test our math. You can test we have both the prompt and we have the complete methodology with all the math, all the data sets. Obviously it's going to be Bank of Canada numbers instead of Federal Reserve numbers. It's going to be your equivalent of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, but you should be able to do this for Canada as well.
Awesome. Okay, let's change subjects only because we're running short on time.
Sure.
But we want to get into solutions. You and I said that we were going to talk about solutions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we are in the process of now seceding from Canada, and you are yeah. Whoa! You are part of the Now I want to make sure that I say this correct. Why can't I find
Free
it? Free
State
State
Project
Project
in New
in New
Hampshire.
Hampshire.
Right. And so
Yeah,
for
and
your
I'm going to bring
audience
this
that
up
isn't
because
for your audience that isn't familiar with the Free State Project, so we've got an organized crime government. It's widely recognized, and there's a lot of people that believe in freedom. Voluntarism falls under the libertarian umbrella. Okay, the word
okay,
libertarian and the political philosophy of libertarianism is kind of like a big tent that includes voluntarists, anarchists, anarcho-capitalists, minarchists, strict constitutionalists. It's a fairly big tent. But 20 plus years ago, we realized that there were a lot of libertarians all over the country, but we were all scattered around. And a gentleman by the name of Jason Sorens, wrote an essay and said, hey, what we need to do is we need to concentrate all the libertarians in one U.S. state. And if we concentrate in one
yeah,
state, he estimated that it would take 20,000 hardcore activists. Because if you're willing to move, you're not just your usual, couch bum or, TV bum or
right.
whatever. You're going to be, you're going to, typically be more
Hardcore.
active and getting
Yeah,
stuff done and making it happen than your average person. So he estimated it would take 20,000 people. And so first they did a bake off and they figured out what state was the easiest to take over. And so they looked at states that had sub uh, 3 million population. So they're looking at states that had under 3 million or 1.5 million in population. And there were about 7
okay,
states at the time. And then they looked at the states and they ranked them by their propensity, for government, love of government, and they ranked them for, how many, employees were on the dole, the government dole, federal and state employees, and what kind of legislators, because we have different legislative processes and bodies in each state. So which legislative processes were most favorable. And it really came down to Wyoming and New Hampshire. They had a bake-off. New Hampshire won. And the original deal is that everybody moves once the total population hit 20,000. And then that would trigger the move. And then you'd have 5 years to move. And then there were a lot of outs. My fiance doesn't want to move
yeah,
to New Hampshire. It's just like a no
yeah.
starter. So I help from afar. I'm like I do more than the average person for the free. I feel like I'm living up to my my thing, and I pop in and out of the state.
Your duty, yeah.
And I sponsor Free State Project events, and I do more than kind of 99% of the people that are there. And but I haven't made the move, but there's other people like me that are helping in the same, kind of way. And then there's 10,000 people on the ground. And so you've had over, I want to say 5, I forget what the number is. It's over, I think, 5,000 people that have physically moved to the state. And then there's another 5,000, that live in the state, but support the goals of the Free State Project. They're called pre-staters. And so there's over 10,000, on the ground, and they've been rolling back laws, and they've been getting libertarians elected to the legislature generally as Republicans, because of the crookedness and the scam of the two-party system here. It's easier to get elected as a Republican than a quote unquote libertarian. But some people are running as Democrats in a kind of reverse Fabian socialism. Fabian socialists are wolves in sheep's clothing. These are sheepdogs in wolves' clothing, and so they'll run as Democrats to grind on the Democrats and things, and so they're getting themselves elected, and then they're voting with a bunch of pro-liberty Republicans and others, and so they've got a huge liberty voting bloc. But really, the most fascinating thing is that they have dozens and dozens of social and political organizations throughout the state. They have 500 plus liberty meetups and events a year. They have camping festivals. They have dating. They've got libertarian dating. They have hiking groups. They have crochet groups. They have clubhouses in every part of the state. They have They've got, where they've literally and bought, clubhouses, and they have events and they have parties, and they're making it fun, and they're creating community, and it's like it is
They're
a blast.
creating community.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it is
Okay, I have a couple questions.
Yeah,
I
go
have a
ahead.
couple questions for you that I think my audience would ask. So you could move anywhere in New Hampshire. Is that the idea? Like
Correct.
you don't
Yes.
have to move to a certain there's no commune or anything like that
No,
that
it's
you
every
have to
corner,
move to a
every
certain area.
single corner of the state, every single city, every single town.
I see.
There's over
Yeah,
1,000.
fantastic.
There's probably 1,500 in Manchester, which is kind of the
Yeah,
epicenter. I'd say there's probably somewhere
I
close
see.
to 1,500 in Manchester. So that's kind of the epicenter of it. But Portsmouth
Mhm.
and Concord and Nashua, like they've all got, huge numbers of libertarians that are participating.
That's amazing. Okay, so what would you suggest, or what do you have as far as tips or suggestions for Albertans that are looking for freedom, before we head off here? Any thoughts on what we're going through? And I mentioned to you that we're in the process of we're following the legal process. We are we are working through all of those legal matters.
Mhm.
We're asking for, it's so weird when you actually think about it. We're asking for forgiveness. We're asking for permission to leave from essentially a divorce from the country that that has been stepping on our neck for 121 years, and now we're now going through the process and asking nicely if we can exit. It's so weird to say that we're going through all of these steps, when we could just say screw you, we're going. But
Well, I mean,
anyway,
so a couple things. I'll go quick because I know we're almost out of time. Number one, you got to understand that. So I'm a voluntarist, and I don't believe in government at all. But over
Mhm.
half of the Free State Project are what we would call a minarchist, a minimum amount of government, or a strict constitutionalist. So they believe in having a government. Okay, but I'd say 40 to 50% of the Free State Project would self-identify as either a voluntarist, a peaceful anarchist, and an anarcho-capitalist. That's how they would self-identify. And so there's a little bit of a fight between that, but we're all pulling together like it's the only state where voting makes sense, voting defensively.
Mhm.
And so number one, you got to understand that it's not just voluntarists like me. It's people that are trying to win in the political process. And the Free State Project, these pro-liberty, pro-libertarian elected legislators have gone up on the dais of the New Hampshire, House of Representatives on multiple occasions and proposed secession. And so there is a open secession movement within New Hampshire.
Mm.
And that is being represented by the legislators themselves, who go up on the dais of the state capitol, and in session they propose secession amendments and they promote secession. And so it's very, very popular within New Hampshire. And so the number one thing
Wow.
that I would suggest, if you guys want to secede, is you've got to get the pro-liberty people concentrated into one area where y'all can be effective. And so the more pro-liberty people that you can attract to Alberta versus Brunswick or wherever, or one of the other provinces, that's going to help you.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing is, there's organizations within the state that rank each legislator, and rank every bill. It's called the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, and they rank every single bill. Is it pro-liberty? Is it anti-liberty?
Oh, really?
And then they give each legislator a grade of A, B, C, D, or constitutional threat. And so they like are like the defining line is if your representative is voting to redistribute money, then that's what you don't want. You only
Yes.
want representatives. I call them privaticians. So the difference between a politician and a privatician is a privatician kind of agrees ahead of time. Hey, I don't, in some cases, I don't believe in government. I'm not going to tell you government's legitimate, but I will serve as an honest steward, and I will try and privatize everything that can be privatized. I promise you, I'm not going to vote to redistribute any of your money. I'm only going to represent you to vote defensively on your behalf in the legislature, and to roll back and privatize and get rid of government and secede. And then there's now
Wow.
you've got a denominator. Now you've got a measuring stick to be able to rank the legislators. Okay, so now who are we getting rid of, and who are we getting elected?
Yes.
And use that as your denominator, and then get the good ones in, throw the bad ones out, and understand that this banking system has already figured out how to buy off legislators and buy off and get them elected. And so you're the opposition you're going to face is, the equivalent of APAC in the United States, like moneyed interests that come in. And so in the United States, the American Israeli Political Action Committee spends $125 million a year to get specific legislators installed that then vote to send billions to Israel. And so you're up against, the equivalent, which is moneyed interests, are going to spend money to elect legislatures to keep the scam of the banking system going. Mark Carney, he worked for the Bank of Canada, and he works for the equivalent of BlackRock in Canada. And so he's not, like you.
Oh yeah, we know.
Yeah, you've got a government of bankers for bankers, and so they're going to oppose you politically. And so you've really just got to spread the word that government is a scam. And the final piece of advice is, you want to roll it back to nothing. You want the free market. You want, honest money. You want like the enemy, the common enemy of the American and the Canadian people is the money changers, is the bankers. That's who's at the top. That's who's bought off the media. That's who monopolized the media. That's who's, that's our common enemy. That's what you're up against. And then just realize, keep your, don't go after go after the matador. Don't go after the cape.
Very, very good information and wise thoughts. I appreciate this. This has been really liberating. This has been good as far as helping us. I think some great information. Thank you so much, Etienne. I'm so excited. I want to take what you did and use it for Canada to really show the what's under the hood. And we already know, because it's so obvious today. They aren't even hiding it anymore. The Mark Carneys, they're not pretending that they're actually for us. They're not pretending that they're actually working for Canadians anymore. They're just out there and freely making decisions that are benefiting them and Brookfield and BlackRock and the globalists. So we think that the writing's on the wall. There, not everybody agrees with us, but we are working through that, and that's an education piece. So you have brought some great information, and hopefully Albertans can utilize some of that information, and we can help to fortify our position. So thank you so much for that.
Sure. Well, is there anything else you want? And then why don't we have a little mastermind session about how you can do the same thing for Canada? We'll take it off air.
Oh yeah. You know what? You and I, we can talk about this after, but let's finish off here, and then we can quickly talk about it after, if that's okay.
Sure.
Does that work?
Yeah. Sounds like a plan.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, we're just going to say goodbye to the audience because we are at our time limit here. But thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you, and I would love to reach out to you again, and maybe we can have another session where we talk about what I found, if that works for you, because that might
Oh,
be
absolutely.
a fun conversation to have as
I'd
well.
love to do it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'd love to. It's funny. You're the first person it's kind of the first person that reminded me, oh, we can do this for all countries. I'm all
Yeah.
excited too now.
Well,
So yeah.
okay. All right. Well, let's do that. Let's plan for that. And I just want to say goodbye. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you. So the Art of Liberty Foundation, Etienne Boetie squared. Thank you
Mhm.
so much for participating and being here in working for liberty of people, really. But I always like to say to my audience on the way out, I just say, let's stay sane together. Keep your head on a swivel. This is Bruce, and I'm out of here. Thank you so much for watching Unscrew the News. I appreciate your participation in freedom in Canada. Share this information and help others to wake up. God bless.